This conference will now be recorded.
It
This
again.
conference will now be recorded.
We are
Voila.
recording now.
Cool. Well, I can actually give an announcement, and this is something we've talked about on this call before, and I've also put out to the Clean listserv, but I got the honor, or the I got roped into coordinating the educator working group for the youth climate strike that is coming up in just over 2 weeks on September 20th. And some folks from here have been supporting on that process. And we are having another call this evening at 4 p.m. Pacific time, so a little late, but that's when we could do it. And what we are essentially trying to do is just pull together a educator resource guide that has a range of different resources to support educators in different ways to engage in and support their students in engaging in the strikes on September 20th. So that can look like in classroom activities. It can look like some simple language around asking and working with your administration to get students permission to get an excused absence for a certain period of time that day, if the school is amenable to that, which some schools are. Some teachers are doing something where they put a sign on their door that says that they're not going to have an exam or require major, like an assignment due that day, as a way of supporting the strike. There'll be some social media resources, as well as a sign-on letter of support for educators. And so we're pulling that resource guide together with the goal of having it pretty close to complete by this Friday, so that then we can start getting it out to teachers in enough time to actually plan what they or their school are going to do on September 20th. So if anyone wants to join that call today at 4 p.m. Pacific, we would love to have you. But then the real ask is, if once that guide is created, if you all want to help in sending it out to your networks, so that we can get it in the hands of as many teachers as possible, and they kind of know what's coming on that date, and sort of like what some range of options are for engaging on that day. Yeah, Frank, we can definitely link in that the climate.gov toolbox.
Absolutely. Also, I noticed that Climate Generation had in their last. Do you get their weekly?
Yes, Chris and I are connected on this.
All right, cool, awesome. Just want to make sure all the dots were connected. Yeah,
we kind of crossed our wires there a little bit, and I had thought Sarah from their team was joining the call, but then she didn't, and then I think we're going to pillage liberally from the resource stock that they already created, since they've already did that, and they have an internal deadline that they wanted to get that out by, which is awesome. I'm all about working with others and collaborating and not reinventing the wheel. Yeah, so I'm definitely going to be pulling from that.
Cool.
Any other announcements?
Sure, Jim Callahan. So let's see if we can tie that in with yours, Rev. Let's see, from the point of view of the climate action and climate education coming together for September 20th. Here's a little bit what's going on in the Bay Area, East Bay in particular. A whole lot is going on. So specifically an event on Sunday with 220,000 people comes every year. We'll have our usual 3 booths with 50 feet of banners at 15 feet high. So everybody sees it. It goes all the way across. It's on both sides of the street. It's the only thing that does that in the whole 1 mile. We're going to have not only the mobile climate science labs, and speak about that in a minute, but UC Berkeley students who are organizing one of the largest events on September 20th on the Sproul Plaza, which is UC Berkeley's main campus. Volunteers from 350 Bay Area, as well as other 350.org affiliates, the Albany and the Berkeley Climate Action Coalition. So that's some of who's coming together. And so that's a lot of promoting, getting people to come to the various 920 events that are happening 12 days later.
Jim, can you just remind us the name of what the event is? Because this is it's on the Sunday before or after?
Yes, this Sunday. It's known as the Solano Avenue Stroll. So it's basically a community street festival that takes place every year, and it reliably draws. I mean, 220,000 people is kind of a conservative number. As I'll mention in the thing, that means there's about 100,000 students there. And I don't know the number of teachers, that's harder to estimate, but it's easily 5,000 and probably over 10,000 teachers come by. So, and that tends to self-select. We get a lot of teachers that come by our booth. Because in addition to focusing on the September 20th, we're just bringing climate education. That's what we do every year. We'll have 10 different lab stations that'll focus on being able to use the fact it's very sunny out there. So a lot of our, the ones that you guys are more familiar with are more for indoors, but we'll have a lot going outside. So, and that just draws a big crowd, which then helps bring people to the September 20th. So anyway, it's the Solano Avenue Stroll. I'll definitely look into what you guys got, Reb, if there's a way that we can help promote the resource guide and so on, because we can promote a lot of things going on at this event. And what do I have? Oh, and also, by the way, Amy, I've reached out to Karen at 10 Strands that if she's going to be in Greece, so I don't know, but I want to bring it up is we're bringing up the idea of promoting the climate summit at the CSTA conference. Because, 220,000 people coming together, 5,000 teachers, we can get the word out a lot about sign up for the CSTA and Climate Summit. So that goes for other things. We can promote clean, all kinds of things. But it's pretty amazing. Almost 250,000 people, and climate change will be a big subject. So
that's great. Thanks, Jim. Mm-hmm. Other announcements?
Yeah, Reb, I just put it in the link. Wow, it's an ugly link, but sorry, it's there. For the U.S. Global Change Research Program webinars. Today, just wrapped up the last of the One NOAA Science Seminars for the 4th National Climate Assessment. They've been posting a lot of the links to the recorded ones that are all on that page. But there's just a wealth of different webinars around different activities that people might want to pilferage, use, reuse. And so I just want to make sure you guys were aware of that resource. It wasn't really targeted for educators, but you may find that to be useful in some things, but not all things.
Great. Thanks, Frank.
Sure.
This is Katie. Can I make an announcement? So I wanted to let people know that we have some new pages on Clean, which is kind of exciting. Well, first off, I think the teleconference page is fixed. So if people wanted to go back to that for the slides or anything today, Patrick put a link to them early on in the chat as well, but they should be back up on the teleconference page site. So let me put the link to that in here in case you want that. Oops. Send it to everyone and not just one person. And then the other pages, I just wanted to make a quick announcement, is we have our Understanding Global Change pages up. We've been working with a group, Jessica Bean sort of runs this group through the University of California, Berkeley University, their Museum of Paleontology, and they've developed this whole framework for trying to understand global change and the complex systems that go in that. And so they've been working on this over the last couple of years, and we have sort of a page that describes the framework itself that they used for this, some of the infographics that go along with it, and then she's also developed some instructional design pieces, a guide that would help teachers use clean resources to sort of generate units that fit into this framework. So check it out if you have a chance. This is links to the main page, and then you can go to the other pages with the instructional design guide and other things like that within that.
Thanks, Katie, for all that hard work. Katie, do you want to also just mention what you and I were talking about earlier today about the NCA?
Yeah, and I'll send an email about this, but we've also been working over the summer with a student on trying to update our National Climate Assessment teaching pages. Frank and I have been working with the student and trying to get things updated to the newest climate assessment that came out last year. So we're going to be looking for some people to help us review the different sections and just sort of make sure that they're up to par and, you know, have good resources and things like that for teachers. So I'll send an email out. We're trying to recruit some people to help with just reviewing. We have a student who's done a bulk of the work, which is really nice, but we will be looking for some people just to sort of make sure that the sections are all good.
And just to build on that, the sections we're talking about are regional, right? So like Reb, we were thinking about you for the north, I'm sorry, the Southwest, which includes California. But you know, Don, we were thinking about you or Ingrid for the Northeast. I see both of you are on the call. So just you know, generally, if you have a focus in a specific area of the country, to be a reviewer for that area, that would be a great thing. Just, you know, shoot us a note and we'll add you to the list. Make sense?
Got it.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Any other announcements? All right, then I am going to go ahead and introduce our guest presenter today. And Nicole, do you want to share your screen? Do you see how to do that?
Yes. Okay. Does that mean you can see me? Sorry, I thought you could see me before.
Yeah.
Hi, Nicole. So I think that currently what we have is, yeah, so we could see your webcam, but it looks like now we can see your screen. Sorry, I was just going to let you know that, yeah, if you want us to see you, you can leave the webcam on. If you don't, then that's fine, but the screen sharing is separate. So.
Okay, got it.
So we just see your desktop though, Nicole. We don't see any slides. Maybe I'll let you.
Oh, I wanted you to be able to see my face, not my slides before I started.
Okay.
So you can't see my face?
No, we see both your desktop and your face. Yes, but
okay.
let me go ahead.
I just felt like it was weird to not show you my face.
Okay, cool. I will introduce you. And I also just am going to say that I'm going to have to hop off before the end of the call. So Katie or Patrick, if you're able to lead us out at the end of the hour, that would be great. So we are excited to have Nicole Seymour with us today as our guest speaker. She is Associate Professor of English and Affiliated Faculty in Environmental Studies and Queer Studies at California State University, Fullerton. She is the author of Strange Natures, Futurity, Empathy, and the Queer Ecological Imagination, as well as Bad Environmentalism, Irony and Irreverence in the Ecological Age, and with Catherine Fusco, co-author of Kelly Reichard. And so, Nicole, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk to us about laughter, grief, and everything in between, mobilizing climate change emotions. So thanks for being here, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, I appreciate everyone listening, watching, wherever you are. And this is my first time doing a live video presentation, so I'm going to try not to mess it up too much. Okay, so I'm going to absent my face and give you some slides. So
I think what Katie was saying is you can still present and we can see your face somehow. Do you have tricks to that, Katie?
Yeah, I think Patrick told me you can kind of stack them, but I think it's okay for now.
Yeah, you can see both and you can stack them, but it does tend to increase like the bandwidth if you're doing the video along with the slides. So it's kind of up to you if you want to do both or not.
Okay, I'll just do slides for now. So.
Okay.
Okay. So again, thank you. So I'm going to start with a tiny bit more about me and my research beyond the intro that I think will make sense of what I'm doing today. So my two major areas of research specialization are, number one, the environmental humanities subfield of queer ecologies, which is basically the intersection of LGBTQ plus theory and politics and environmental theory and politics. And number two, the humanities subfield of affect studies. So affect in that context is a kind of broad category that encompasses, emotion, feeling, sensibility, attitude, tone, a lot of sort of synonym type concepts. And that's basically what I'll be talking about today. So affect in relation to climate crisis. And as you I don't know if anyone saw the abstract yet, but I've organized my presentation into two parts. sort of an artificial division between research and pedagogy for the sake of being organized. So first is research, second pedagogy and service. So just a moment ago, I mentioned queer ecologies as one of my areas of research specialization. And I think I kind of have to start there to fully explain my interest in affect. So in 2013, as the intro just mentioned, I finished a book called Strange Natures, Futurity, Empathy, and the Queer Ecological Imagination, which had a fair bit about affect in there, as you can see with the title's mention of empathy. So in this book, I showed how contemporary queer novelists and filmmakers from the Americas staged forms of cross-species empathy in order to develop a queer ecological imagination or consciousness, maybe it's another word for that. So for example, I looked at a Caribbean novel by Shawnee Mutu. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this, but basically there's a transgender protagonist that serves as a caretaker for plants and animals as well as people, and she explains her gender transition through the language of nature. So she empathizes with the life cycle transitions of plants, especially the cereus, which is a night blooming plant, and she sees herself as similarly a kind of transforming biological creature that deserves care. So basically the character is kind of like, I'm just like a plant, I transform, I deserve care. So as I was finishing that, the first book, I started thinking about other queer sensibilities besides empathy, and specifically less idealized ones like irreverence and sassiness and irony. And I also started thinking about queer cultural modes that are tied up in affect, so things like campy humor or playful drag performance. And I started to wonder, what role those things might have to play or have already played in environmental consciousness or environmental movements. And that started me on a path to the next book that the intro also mentioned, about environmentalism, irony, and irreverence in the Ecological Age, which came out a couple months ago. And the scope of the book ended up going beyond queer artists and performers and activists, but that's still a core element there. And the book starts with a major grounding premise, which is that there's a common and cliched, but not entirely inaccurate view in the global north of environmentalists, animal rights activists, eco-critics, and so on, as unfun, unfunny, gloomy, doomy killjoys. And so I'm sure we've all seen lots of things like this. This is a study that came out, or a report on a study that came out recently, Everyone Hates Environmentalists and Feminists. So it's Exhibit A of my premise. Exhibit B, this is a scholarly article, Vegan Killjoys at the Table, that rather than trying to combat that killjoy reputation, actually kind of doubles down on it and claims, you can see this at the very bottom of the image, claims that, quote, the decentering of joy and happiness is integral to the critical deconstructive work of the vegan killjoy, end quote, which kind of sounds like, I don't know, a steakhouse commercial or something. So again, the premise is, people think of environmentalists as not being fun, as being critical, finger wagging, etc. And in fact, if we were to catalog the affects and sensibilities typically or stereotypically associated with mainstream environmentalism, we would probably come up with things like guilt, shame, didacticism, prescriptiveness, sentimentality, reverence, seriousness, sincerity. This is a very long list. Earnestness, wonder, sanctimony, certitude, and of course, gloom and doom. And so actually, I present in the book a kind of schema where I think about how the affects typically associated with environmentalism contrast the affects typically associated with queer communities and cultures. So if environmentalism, again, typically or stereotypically advocates restraint, queer cultures and movements have advocated indulgence and so on. So I'll just leave this up for a second, let you scan it while I grab some water. Okay, so at the same time, absurdities and ironies abound when it comes to environmental issues themselves. And I don't think I have to say much about the absurdity of environmental policy and leadership in the US at this time. So just a few words on irony. Eco-critic Frederick Buell has described how environmental crisis has become a normal part of everyday life in his book, From Apocalypse to Way of Life, while sociologist Kari Norgaard has found that often the more one knows about environmental crisis, the less likely one is to act if one gets paralyzed and overwhelmed. So these are very ironic scenarios, right? Moreover, a phenomenon such as climate change with its threats to human health and livelihood can be seen as quintessentially ironic insofar as it constitutes unintended and unexpected, or initially unexpected, consequences of human actions. So in this recent book, I consider contemporary texts from the global north that both identify and respond to these absurdities and ironies through absurdism and irony themselves, as well as related affects and sensibilities, like I just mentioned. So irreverence, ambivalence, camp, frivolity, indecorum, awkwardness, sardonicism, perversity, playfulness, and glee. I'm really into lists, I'm realizing as I'm reading this talk. To give two quick illustrations before moving on, examples include things like MTV's 2003 to 2006 nature program parody, Wild Boys, in which the hosts poke fun at animals even as they draw attention to issues like habitat destruction. And the current US activist group Queers for the Climate, who do things like perform drag, and here you're not seeing drag, there's been an action, public action, who do things like perform drag in response to sea level rise rather than just wringing their hands over it. These examples demonstrate environmentalist commitments, but reject the effective hallmarks of environmentalism that I've been kind of listing. And I should clarify here that by bad, when I talk about bad environmentalism, I mean, effective modes not obviously suited to the concerns at hand, or that seem inappropriate or improper for the context. So I'm not trying to make a moral judgment like these are morally bad, but they are bad in terms of context. These texts also display self-reflexivity and self-consciousness as opposed to the sometimes single-minded self-righteousness of mainstream environmentalism. I find that this practice of bad environmentalism is both widespread and understudied. So I trace it across multiple media forms and genres from the global north, including, animation, documentary and fiction film, memes, poetry. There's a couple of those. Performance art, prose fiction, reality TV, sketch and stand-up comedy, and visual art since at least the 1970s. And the book thereby tries to outline a neglected tradition of alternative environmentalism and expand our narrow understandings of what environmentalism can look, sound, and most importantly, feel like. And finally, the book features a significant metacritical component, and this might be a little insider baseball, but I'm just going to go for it. So I spent a lot of time questioning eco-critics and other environmental humanist tendencies to judge artworks primarily by their capacity to educate the public or inspire measurable change. And I try to demonstrate how a less strictly instrumentalist approach allows us to imagine different or additional functions for environmental art. And I'm giving you some examples of those here. So enacting catharsis, raising activist morale, expressing dissatisfaction or disaffection with the environmentalist status quo, refusing what sociologist Giselle Kuipers calls obligatory responses to disaster, mitigating the bitter partisan divide over environmental issues, and or inspiring what geographer Shiloh Krupar calls artful endurance. I'm therefore trying to model a criticism that is non-normative and non-instrumentalist, or at least trying to be open to the multiple possibilities of cultural text. To kind of sum up, bad environmentalism tries to both diversify the archive of environmental art and activism and reassess how that archive is constituted in the first place. And I should say what the book doesn't do, I'm not an empirical researcher, I'm not trying to be a polemicist per se, so I'm not trying to prove that bad environmentalism officially works better whatever that would mean, than mainstream environmentalism. And I'm not trying to, say that it has to be embraced by everyone, et cetera. But I do want to call attention to the fact that it exists, right? There's this very diverse tradition of what I'm calling bad environmentalism, and trying to just show that contemporary artists and activists in the global north have seen a need for whatever reason to mobilize bad affects for environmentalist purposes. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is give you a more in-depth example of something I cover in the book. But I'm just going to pause for a second, make sure everyone's okay. Can everyone see everything? Is everyone still awake? Are we all good?
Absolutely. This is awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Just checking. Okay. So I'm going to give you, like I said, an in-depth example. And this is a 2011 documentary called Peak. And it's from a German-Italian director named Hannes Lang, L-A-N-G. It focuses on the effects of climate change in the primarily German-speaking region of the Italian Alps, where Lang was born. And in short, the kind of summary of the situation is that it snows less often than in previous generations, and the ski tourism industry has responded by installing high-tech snowmaking systems and constructing massive water reservoirs to supply them. These changes are not treated simply as a matter of doom or gloom, and in fact are met with marked ambivalence in the film, which also enacts and depicts awkwardness, irony, deadpan humor, and what I'm calling flat affect. And you'll see that in just a second. In the chapter on the film, I demonstrate how its use of those affective elements both forestalls and allows us to critically reflect on the typical affective demands of environmental documentary and climate change documentary in particular. So I'm going to show a two-shot sequence from the film that's focused on blue-collar workers who work at the ski resort. And I'm going to describe it first because it's in German dialect. I don't know if anyone speaks German dialect, but also I tested the slides with Patrick and the audio was pretty low, but the visual is really what I'm interested in here. So you're going to see a first shot where a worker describes the evidence of climate change he's seen over the years and how there's not much economic opportunity in the region except to work in the ski industry. And after this first shot of this guy talking, there's going to be a second shot of a group of workers. And in that second shot, I'm going to ask you to try to keep an eye on the guy on the far left, if you can. So guy on the far left in the second shot. Okay, here we go. Hope it works.
Hauptsächlich, wo die Gletscher in Meißen zurückgehen, oder? Das wird schon irgendwie mit der Südströmung was zu tun haben. Da müssen wir probieren. Und wenn wir das schaffen, jeden Tag früher, wo wir den Herbst aufbringen, ist unser Reklame. Das ist schon, das sind ja Hänge, wo am Fremdenverkehr. Das ist leider toll. Uns gibt es nicht. Wenn wir keinen Fremdenverkehr haben, wäre nichts dann da.
Okay, so statistically speaking, the second shot is long, but it feels long. It also feels long due to its content or lack of content. A couple of the men, as you saw, are smiling slightly, while others' faces are utterly impassive. All maintain their facial expressions without change. This shot could actually be mistaken for a still image if it were not for the slight swaying of the man on the far left. So that's why I was asking you to kind of keep an eye on him, because he moves a little bit back and forth. Otherwise, you would not believe this was an actual live shot. So I can't speak for anyone else, but this shot makes me feel awkward when I watch it. The men appear awkward. I feel awkward. There's a lot of awkwardness. The sequence itself feels awkward or performs awkwardness in the sense that it seems ambivalent or unsure about itself. So it's kind of this vibe of, should I keep rolling? Should I cut here? Further, Lang does not contextualize or narrativize these men's presence. We have to kind of make the connotative leap from the first shot to the second shot. Who are they and what are they doing there? Why are they standing there? Should we laugh at them, be moved by their performance, etc.? Long does not make any clear appeals. So not only does Peak ask us to feel differently vis-a-vis the typical environmental documentary, it sometimes does not ask us to feel anything in particular at all. And in these moments, I recognize the film's self-awareness and self-reflexivity. So sequences like this one draw explicit and suspicious attention to documentary conventions, such as the talking head element. Long displays bodies, but often fails to put them to work, so to speak. Such sequences draw attention to the effective appeals that environmental documentary, and climate change documentary in particular, typically makes precisely by absenting those appeals. More broadly, Long asks us to reflect on the complex operations of environmental affect by putting notably flat, inscrutable, and or seemingly unnatural affect on display. In an artistic genre known for grim conviction, Peak dares to ask, do we always know how to feel or proceed when it comes to environmental crisis? Indeed, in the frequent moments where the film seems as if it does not know what it is doing, it mimics the confusion that currently plagues so many of us. What happens when our feelings are ambivalent, contradictory, inappropriate, and are paralyzing? And just to be clear, I don't think that Long is being flippant at all about climate change and its devastating effects, but I think his film is willing to take apart a kind of typical affective syntax and open up space for complicated reactions. Now I'll explore this concept of ambiguous or ambivalent affect a tiny bit further through another sequence that is also notably awkward that appears later in the film. And there's actually barely any sound here, so you're really not missing anything.
Did we lose you?
I'm not sure. I'm going to pause for a second.
Oh,
can you still see the screen?
Yeah, I can hear you now too. I felt like we couldn't hear you for a minute there.
Okay, so there's actually no sound or very little. It's just kind of ambient sound.
Oh, that's why for this clip it's no sound. Okay, sorry, that was my fault.
No, no worries, no worries. Okay, so clip is over. I always laugh when the skier guy comes by at the end because I feel like he kind of breaks up the awkward tension a little bit. So here what the Goethe Institute has called the film's, quote, lack of judgmental comments, end quote, allows for a fair amount of ambiguity or ambivalence regarding what the audience is to make of these skiers, snowboarders, and tourists. Are we to find them ironic in and of themselves? So, for example, to think, they're culprits, they're complicit in climate change, but they look so cheerful. But they also love the mountains, love nature, and the outdoors, or they would not be there. Perhaps they exemplified Tim Morton's notion of dark ecology, quote, the contingent and necessarily queer idea that we want to stay with a dying world, end quote, even if it means propping that world up artificially in the meantime. In Morton's term queer, it's sort of like a broader sense of strangeness rather than LGBTQ here, but I think it kind of nicely captures the uncanny, awkward nature of this film, Peak. Okay, so I'm going to kind of sum up here. Peak does not seek to impart knowledge around climate change, and as I have hinted, it sometimes resists didacticism to the point of being totally enigmatic. Whereas climate change documentaries typically ask us to look at them, to look at their evidence, and to feel a certain way, Long's film looks back at us, and with a deadpan expression, define our desire to be told what to think and how to feel. So that is the end of part 1, and I'm going to move on to part 2. I'm going to turn on my webcam if this is going to work, just to bring a little humanity back in. This second section will be a little shorter and more informal. So hence the face for a moment, and then I'll go back to the widescreen. So because of these interests I have in affect studies, I jumped at the recent chance to participate in a pedagogical service project called NXTerra that has asked me to do further work around climate change and affect or emotions. Now I'm going to give some relatively deep background on how this whole situation came about, because I think it will be of interest to some of you, if not all of you. So in 2016, I became a part of a joint project between the UC and CSU campuses known as the CAN, K-A-N for short, but the long title is the Knowledge Action Network for Transformative Climate and Sustainability Education and Action. And I'm going to list, let's see, hold on, sorry. I'm listing links here for future reference. I'm not going to paste them in the chat just to keep things simple, but I went ahead and took screenshots of what's on those links, so you don't need to follow them. Okay. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing my webcam. Okay. So I think this is back to full screen. Okay. The CAN was funded by the Faculty Education and Engagement Work Group of the UC President's Global Climate Leadership Council and the University of California's Carbon Neutrality Initiative. The leadership team consisted of UC faculty project lead and project director, Dr. John Ferran from UC Santa Barbara, CSU faculty project lead, Dr. Sarah Jaquette Ray from Humboldt State, UC Santa Barbara graduate student, Theo Lekesny, and UC Irvine Sustainability Initiative team member, Kimberly Solano. I don't actually remember how I originally saw the call for participants for the CAN, but long story short, I applied and was selected to be a quote unquote area team coordinator. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side, they're sort of explaining that concept. So that meant that I co-organized with my colleague Gabriela Nunez a 2-day workshop at Cal State Fullerton that brought together area faculty from places like Cal State Long Beach, UC Riverside, Cal State Northridge, and so on. And this was essentially a networking experience. We built formal and informal collaborative relationships that have led to everything from participants giving talks to students on each other's campuses to joining conferences organized by other participants. So a lot of great stuff came out of that. And then the current phase of the initiative, which is also funded by the UC Carbon Neutrality Initiative, is known as NXTerra. And again, I've done the same thing here. I'm giving a link, but I'm just going to work you through it. Okay, so NXTerra is a digital platform for climate change educators developed again by UC and CSU faculty. And members from the original CAN group were invited to participate, and then we added additional participants from outside the CAN. To begin building the platform, we met for 2 days at UC Santa Barbara in February to generate goals and guidelines, to give feedback on the initial design by Richard Whittick, and to divide ourselves up into teams of quote unquote curators for specific subject areas. Before I talk about those, I'm just going to show you the second slideshow here. So for example, the second paragraph says, NXTerra produces, curates, and delivers climate change, critical sustainability, and climate justice education resources for educators of every discipline, from the arts to the humanities, to the human and social sciences, and the natural sciences. I was talking about the areas, the specific subject areas that the platform will include, and these are everything from religion and climate, climate justice, to climate change fiction, climate change emotions, and many more. And I've been working on the latter two, climate change fiction and climate change emotions, but I'm just going to talk about the emotions page since it fits with my theme. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, it says NXTerra will launch publicly in the fall of 2019. That's still the plan. We're going to have a soft launch sometime in the next couple months, probably with some tweaks to come. So my co-curator for the Climate Change Emotions page is Sarah Jaquette Ray, the CAN leader I just mentioned from Environmental Studies at Humboldt State. Just to introduce her, since I'll mention her a couple more times, this is a poster of a recent talk she gave. She has a forthcoming book with University of California Press on climate change emotions in the classroom that I think a lot of you would be interested in. And she's really been spearheading conversations around feelings of grief and hopelessness that arise in students during or after classes on climate change, and other examples of environmental crisis. And Sarah says she's really driven by the sense of responsibility, as am I, to address the mental health impacts of being an environmental studies or environmental humanities student, or really any kind of student or human at this point in time, and to find ways to support and empower students who are experiencing those feelings. In terms of process, what Sarah and I did to build our page, and this is the page, was to contact climate change educators that, like us, are thinking about affect and emotion. So we contacted people, either directly or through kind of put out calls through social media, and we've solicited syllabi, bibliographies, activities and assignments, and classroom tools like videos and podcasts. And we are very eager to add more. So if you have anything that you think would fit, please let me know. You can also see that we have a section on youth empowerment that's kind of in the middle of the right side of the page. And that has everything from lists of youth climate and environmental justice organizations to resources on hope and optimism. In our communication with potential contributors, we stressed that we really wanted concrete activities and assignments more than documents like syllabi, because even though syllabi are very useful, they don't always tell us, they tell us the what of teaching, but they don't always tell us the how of teaching. So what I decided I'll do for the rest of my presentation is to highlight a couple of the items we received. So the first one was a eulogy assignment from Joshua Barnett, who is a professor of communication at University of Minnesota Duluth. And this assignment comes about 3/4 of the way through his ecological communication course, after students have read various interdisciplinary essays and chapters on things like mourning and affect. This is just a quick look at the syllabus. So they read Sigmund Freud's Mourning and Melancholia. They read Glenn Albrecht's Solastalgia, a new concept in health and identity. I'll just pause for a second here and say I'm sure a lot of people already know about solastalgia, but just in case, since it's a sort of weird word, Albrecht coined this in 2003 to refer to, quote, the lived experiences of distressing negative environmental change, end quote. And I don't know that it took off so much in sort of non-academic circles. I think terms like climate grief have kind of supplanted it. But anyway, so Barnett lays a lot of groundwork with these readings, and then students receive this eulogy assignment, which asks, this is sort of long quotation, how can we attend to the deaths of more than human beings and the degradation of places in a way that communicates to others how these losses matter? For your final writing assignment, you will prepare a eulogy for a creature, species, or place that either has already been lost or that is threatened or otherwise at risk. And continuing on the next slide, in keeping with the form of the eulogy, your essay should commend the object of your lamentation. It should also develop an argument about the loss of more than human beings and places. Why does it matter? How do such losses shape our sense of who we are? How do we account for our own culpability in such losses, etc.? So students end up writing a 5 to 6 page essay in response to this prompt that they then present to their peers. And it occurs to me, I haven't thought a ton about this, but I'm just thinking through the emotions element here, and it seems like it gives students the opportunity to simply express their emotions in the first place, but also to try to do something proactive or productive with those emotions, which is to communicate them effectively to someone else. Okay, and this is the second example that I think kind of complements the eulogy one. And it's quote unquote Change Agent Manifesto from Sarah Jaquette Ray, person I keep mentioning, and my co-curator. And this assignment draws on the work of Adrienne Marie Brown and Abby Reyes. And what I like about it is that it doesn't mention affect or emotion per se, but it helps students move beyond despair, ideally move beyond despair, and see themselves as empowered. Sarah says that she typically uses this assignment for environmental studies students in their senior year of university, when she says, quote, acquired a good sense of what it means to be a social change agent through our readings and discussions, end quote. And she also publishes the completed manifestos on her blog because she says that students tend to take them more seriously if they're going to become public. So the assignment ultimately asks for I will type statements about what the writer will be doing to make change in the world, but the bulk of the prompt itself, which I'm showing here, is a series of brainstorming questions. What courses, assignments, readings, professors, experiences, or other influences have occurred in the past few years that have powerfully shaped your thinking? What is the utmost priority you want to commit your time and energy toward? What is not a priority for you, even as it may be important for others? For example, I love art and I'll leave policy making for others. Or I'm a control freak and love clear direction and stability, so I'll need to effect change from within established systems. Be honest with yourself, not just aspirational. Consider your strengths, weaknesses, passions, opportunities, and threats, aka SWOT. What qualities do you hope to manifest in your work? What is the nature of the work, not just the product of that work, that you most care about? Putting aside what you think are important measurable impacts, how do you want to spend your time? I'm personally kind of overwhelmed by these questions, like in a good way, because I think they're really important for everyone, not just for students, but I haven't yet set aside the time to write my own manifesto. So I think I'm actually just going to stop there and thank you all for listening to me talk about mobilizing climate change emotions, and I will be happy to take questions now or in the future if you want to send me a message. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Oh gosh, it looks like we might have lost Patrick. Sorry, I thought he was going to take over this part. So yeah, I can help with facilitating. If anybody has any questions for Nicole, that'd be great. Let us know.
Nicole, I have a question. This is Frank Neapold over at NOAA Climate Program Office.
Yes.
So
yeah,
awesome. Can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. Awesome work. You know, one thing I'm puzzled with, and I'm just wondering how this would work is, I'm trying to go back a few, maybe 5 years ago, it really started becoming, maybe even earlier, apparent that when you go from individual actions to collective actions, those that are commensurate to the size of the problem, what to do that would actually make a difference on this issue is a non-trivial thing. And so a lot of the theories are identifying the need for emotional and psychological reasons to have commensurate response. But just the fact that it's hard to find where commensurate response is could also, by very nature, be, you know, an unresolved issue. And so project, you know, before we get to that's part A, I mean, does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there's always this question, well, what is the commensurate response, and does it make a difference? And I think that there's sort of this deep irony at the core of all activism that I think the irony of the texts I look at are actually getting to, which is that it might not make a difference, but you do it anyway. And there's a civil rights sort of, I look at sort of civil rights rhetoric from the 60s that sort of gets at that sort of absurdist notion, right? That like you might not live to see change, but you do it anyway. So I guess to me, that's sort of like why I like irony stuff. It's just a sort of this absurd situation, and it creates this additional set of emotions that aren't just like hope and despair, right? It's something weirder or something kind of in the middle. So
I'm with you, but so we found this idea of the way we describe it in our community is like making solutions visible, because if you don't see them, it's easy to miss progress. And unfortunately, issues are you have to look with intention. And so one of the big projects that's been making very positive rounds in our community, which might be interesting to connect here, is the Project Drawdown book website, which is all about more ambition than anybody in the international climate community's tried. And it's comprehensive, it's quantitative, and it's complex in its richness. But I hadn't heard that in this context, so I'm just wondering if that playing with that in this work would be interesting. Those solution frameworks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I should say I show students clips from this film. The peak film, I've never taught the whole thing. I don't think I would just do that in the classroom. I guess I think it would be really well paired with something that's very concrete. Something like, obviously the climate strikes, which my students are doing. But yeah, I guess what I would say that I like about the first film is that it sort of gets at this idea that it's okay if you don't know what to do right now. It's not okay forever, right? But not everyone has the answers right now. Not everyone knows what to do. Not everyone reads the news and is like, I've got it, So yeah, absolutely. I think it would be nice to pair, again, maybe not the whole film, but just clips from the film with something that's a lot more action-based. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion.
Sure, I'll add the link here if you haven't seen it.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of it, but I thank you.
Nicole, a question?
So
Jim Callahan, Mobile Climate Science Labs. Do you know of anyone have you or anyone in the community done any kind of analysis that would be along this line of the similarities between the treatment of the LGBT community, being marginalized, being a minority, being ridiculed, being made illegal, all kinds of things, with how historically those educators in climate change who do what you're speaking of, that don't just talk about the scary part, but get into how it's fun and how it's discovery and how it's engaging and all those, bringing in the other emotions that are positive, how those educators have historically been treated, because they have been marginalized, they have been ridiculed, they have been treated as a minority. That goes in K-12 education, that goes in the college level, that lesser so, but somewhat in the informal education. And you can look in California itself, because there's been so much development in California. Why is that type of education kept out of the K-12 textbooks? Why? Why? How has that happened? Because there have been educators for decades who have worked to have it be fun and things. Now, another part I would add to it is, just as the LGBT community, they don't stop. Those educators have done it anyway and have found the resilience and done it, maybe in the minority and maybe marginalized, but they find a way to do it, and they don't just give up, and they don't give up who they are. So that's just an area. Do you know of anybody who's found, looked for those similarities?
So lots to say there. I don't know of anything specifically that's sort of comparing the experience, but I do know, I've done some of this work myself on people that are both, right? People that are LGBTQ and climate activists or climate educators. And so combining that it's, I guess not seeing like a parallel, but actually seeing a direct connection there. But just sort of anecdotally thinking about, I asked my students, I taught a sort of intro lesson on queer ecologies last week actually, and told my students about plastic-free pride. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this, but it's a movement to make pride parades and events, less wasteful, less trash, less plastic, etc. And then I asked them to, since we're talking about the climate strike, to sort of take the next step and tell me, okay, what do you think is the connection between LGBTQ issues and climate issues? Like, where, you know, why does it make sense that we're talking about the climate strike in this class, which is LGBTQ literature? And they said really fascinating things that are very similar to what you're saying, like this idea of, you know, being in the closet, trying to, and having a lack of government support, right? Think about the AIDS crisis, right? Government inaction and government support seem to be themes shared across both experiences, and sort of this idea of bringing something out of the closet into the light that no one actually wants to, or most people don't want to talk about, or most people don't want to hear. So yeah, I think, I mean, my students are even getting at those connections that you're talking about. And just in terms of the ridicule, sorry, you're just inspiring me, a lot of thoughts in me, but thinking about the issue of the ridicule, I think what's kind of interesting about the text that I talk about is they're all kind of making fun of themselves in some way. And I think it's this effort to kind of undercut the idea that other people are going to make fun of you, right? Well, if I can poke fun at myself, you don't really get to take a dig at me. And so I think, not that that's, I don't know, I don't think I'm like advocating that climate educators make fun of themselves per se, but you know, having a sense of humor kind of undercuts this idea that someone's going to call you an environmentalist killjoy, or you know, fill in the blank. So yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think I would suggest groups like, if you're interested in this, Out for Sustainability. It's OUT, the number 4, sustainability. Queers for the Climate. Again, those more activists rather than educators per se, but they're trying to say it's not just, they agree with you, right? It's not just that there are parallels, that there's actually direct connections between these communities. So yeah, thank you.
And I would certainly add that there is, thank you on that. There's certainly probably not a entire coincidence that San Francisco is both one of the centers for LGBT community being strong and being able to be itself and be there, and where fun, engaging, hands-on science on climate change has its strongest base as well. So that's where science festivals and things are. There's something about that community that encourages that and celebrates it. Doesn't marginalize it. So
yeah. I think there was a survey too that came out. I would have to find it, but it came out a couple of years ago, and it you know, just showed that queer people believe in climate change more than straight people. So it's kind of like, you know, a built-in, for whatever reason, it might just be breaking down along political lines, but yeah, that there's a built-in there has been a built-in willingness to talk about these issues. So yeah. Anyone else?
And we are at the end of the hour here, so if anybody else does have a final question, we'll allow that to happen, but just so you know that we'll try to keep it short if we can, just to be within time. Any last questions for Nicole? Great. Well, thank you so much. This was really interesting. And yeah, I hope you're part of our network, because I personally am like, this really neat stuff. And I'd like to hear more about this and hopefully have conversations on our network, but also sounds like you guys with this NXTerra, we can keep in with you as well. So thank you so much, Nicole. And I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Yes, please send me anything that might be relevant to put on this platform. So yes, thank you again and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. Bye.